There's Zoom. Hey, everybody. We've got Brant Evans with us today. He does a lot of things, but primarily what I wanted to do is pick his brain about this psychodynamic group processing that he does. He's been an organizational development kind of leader. He's done some wilderness therapy. I don't know. Maybe you should introduce yourself as you're sipping out of your drink. I'm asking you to talk.
My yerba mate, man.
You're my mate.
Yeah.
Yeah, introduce yourself to everybody so we know who you are and I don't botch it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, by the way. I know we've been playing ping pong for a little while and playing Twitter tag and or X tag as it is now.
Yeah, we met on X. Where all good people meet.
Yep, yep. Um, yeah, so some folks may know me as Brant Elwood. That's what I published under, and that's gonna be the name that my wife and I take together at some point. But Evans is fine too. And yeah,
Is there a
my
story there?
background.
Feels like there's a story there.
Well, it has to do a little bit with the wilderness therapy piece. We met doing that work. Elwood is, means of the old wood or of the noble woods.
Thought you were going to say
We,
Blues Brothers.
yeah, if people say that, and then I think I've heard somebody reference, I guess in Legally Blonde, the character's name is like Ella Wood
Oh,
or something like that. So
yeah.
definitely not a reference to that. But we liked that. I like that idea of choosing something new together and picking something that had like that meaning. So we haven't gotten the paperwork done on that, but that
That's
is
kind of cool
what I
though. That's
publish under.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
cool.
Um, so done some wilderness therapy. That was really what got me falling in love with the idea of personal growth, introspection, and seeing the kind of transformations that are possible in human beings. I'm not a licensed clinician. I did my master's work in social organizational psychology. So I think, as you alluded to, my interest in, dare I say, expertise lies in the group unconscious when groups come together, the things that are understood by all in the room but never spoken, looking at how roles naturally emerge. Um, we use the term valence for like the roles that find us throughout our lives that are consistent. You may have noticed that you take similar roles in different groups that you're in. We would say that you have like a valence for those specific roles, so that's like a factor in that. And the book that I published with Adon Moran is called Gods, Heroes, and Groups: Relational Dynamics through Mythic Archetypes. And yeah, it's looking at the what I think is amazing interplay between myths and kind of this Joseph Campbell lens on stories that have stuck with us and what those say about how our groups operate. And so, if folks are familiar with Robert Bly or folks are familiar with Michael Mead and some of these other folks that have done writings on myth and the application of personal development, what we did was we took that lens and started to look at groups and how they operate and the play between the two. And yeah,
Oh,
I think that's probably I'll stop there, but that's basically the what I've been up to.
yeah, it's a good tee up. So maybe we should define terms a little bit here for the lay audiences. If you're in the clinical realm and you had your education greater than 10 years ago, we'll say, you probably have some exposure to Jungian analytic psychology, psychoanalysis, psychodynamic terms. If you've graduated in the last 10 years, you probably got either just a very brief overview or nothing at all. And so I wanted to revisit some of this stuff. And you mentioned the word archetype, and you
Hmm.
mentioned mythology and heroes and myths. And so I'm going to let you do this because you're the guest, but I want to hear what your definitions are of these terms and really what is the unconscious also? Like, what does that mean? And what do you mean about the collective understanding, this
Hmm.
implied knowledge that we have that you alluded to, that everybody knows what we're talking about, but we don't really talk about it. So if you could explain all that from a foundational perspective and put some definitions to it, I think that would help
Sure.
advance our discussion a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. The way I generally talk about it, and just to be clear, I'm not an expert in Jungian psychology. I like quite a few of his ideas. What I really like are some of the extrapolations people have done that came
Sure.
after him. Um, to be clear to anyone that has studied Jung, we're not talking, when we say the group dynamics and we say the group unconscious, we're not talking about the collective unconscious.
Collective.
That's
Okay.
a
Correct.
separate,
Correct. Correct. Yes.
yeah.
That's a very different
The
thing.
collective, yeah. So Jung is often credited with basically being the grandfather of archetypal thinking, which is not quite correct. That was getting thrown around before him. Freud certainly tapped into some of that. And then the farther back you go into religions that worked with myth, right? Like archetypal thinking was clearly a part of that.
Dreams too.
But yeah, right.
Yeah.
And Jung did a lot of uh, very revolutionary work, right, where he brought the thinking around dreams and symbolism into the mainstream in a pretty beautiful way. But he talks about archetypes as these shared frameworks that we all have access to, that reside in what he calls the collective unconscious, and that as a human being we have like access to this tapped reservoir of shared deep level of experience, or um,
Common understanding, usually.
common
Yeah.
understanding would be a good way to say it, right? What I mean when I talk about the group unconscious is that when you form a new team at work, or when you are on a school project with a group of four other students, or when you're in a family situation, anytime there's a group of people that have interdependent shared interests, then we argue that there's a uh, an effect called the group unconscious that arises naturally, where it's slippery and it really is like hard to define, but it's basically like an unconscious set of culture norms and agreements that everyone seems to somehow sign, but nobody explicitly says those things. And it's fascinating because it's extremely powerful. So if you've led teams, and Jake, you do, right? You have,
I
yeah.
do, and I have, and I continue, and
Yeah.
I anticipate more in the future. Yes.
If you've led teams, or if you've been a part, everyone who is going to listen to this will be able to relate to this idea of being a part of a group. It's a very human experience. Um, we've probably all experienced that situation where the group has a very clear goal, like here's what we're here to accomplish, and watched the group find ways to sabotage itself on the journey towards that explicit goal. And so I haven't said his name yet, but Wilfred Bion is a psychologist who really dug into a lot of this type of thinking. He was pretty foundational, kind of right after World War II, looking at this idea of how the group unconscious has a separate set of goals, basically. And so he called them basic assumptions. He used kind of some jargon, but effectively he said there's this explicit goal that we set, and that would be, hey, this work team needs to deliver this project, or another good one would be the government is supposed to uh, pass these laws that protect the common interests, and look out for the interests of the people, and create healthy boundaries for us as a society. And then there's the unconscious goals that come in and conflict often with those and are very, very powerful. He would argue that there are three types of unconscious goals that come up. There's the fight or flight. He kind of groups those together. There's dependency, and then there's pairing is the other one. I don't think it's so important to like get into the niche definitions of each of these. I actually don't agree that those are discrete categories that account for all of the unconscious drives, but he watched groups very often defer or shrug off responsibility, and this is what he called like the dependence mode. Effectively, is like looking for a savior, looking for a leader that has all the answers. If we look at like the psychology of cults, or if we look at the psychology of partisan politics currently, I think you can see some of that piece where it's like so alluring to the unconscious to find that omniscient figure that has the answers and that can guide us out and relieve us of the terrible burden of responsibility. That would be like an example. None of us agree out loud that that's what we're doing. There's always a reason that we can come up with, but it's very, very common that you can look at and study groups and see that, hey, you say you want this thing. Everyone agrees that this is the goal, yet the group is stuck in infighting, or the group is stuck in running away and avoiding these specific issues. And that's unconscious. Nobody agreed to that, but everybody senses that that's in the room.
Well, or I mean, I'm about to jump out of my skin thinking about all the committees and coalitions and
Yeah.
boards and things that I've served on where it's like, well, let's form a subcommittee, and then the subcommittee will report back. And then you fast forward like 2 years, and literally nothing has been done except
Hmm.
produce paperwork about what you said you were going to do. There's
Hmm.
no tangible outputs, right? And it drives people like me bonkers because I actually want tangible outputs. I want to be able to point to something. I want the committee or the organization to dissolve itself once the goal has been achieved, and that doesn't happen, right? And I think
Right.
you're right. A lot of times we find ourselves in a situation where we are unspokenly following some trend or motif or belief system that is not in print. You know, I mean, I'm thinking even like the unwritten rules of baseball, right? Like you drill our
Yeah.
guy, we drill your guy. Well, nobody does that anymore. Yeah, they still do. Why? We don't talk about it. So what you're talking about there too is something I think I would call it the shadow, where this power exists. You don't want to acknowledge it. You're real quick to point it out in other people. You don't want to see it in yourself. And if it's brought to your own attention, you actually become defensive about it. So I was
Oh
thinking
yeah.
about your reference to I'll just call it a strong man. We want a strong man to swoop in and save us, right? And then if you point that out, if you dare point that out to the group members, they would say, no, 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 that's not what we're doing. We're not looking for a
Yeah.
savior, except they
Mhm.
are.
If you point it out, you're threatening the deliciousness of that pursuit, right? Like you're
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you're breathing air onto it, and those dynamics can't function in the same way if you're pointing it out. And that makes you the enemy of the group in a way at times. Like the group will like be very frustrated with members that do try to point those
Oh,
things
I've
out.
absolutely been uninvited from groups to which I was invited
Right.
because I dared point to the unconscious function of the group. I didn't have that name for it because I hadn't really framed it in such a way. I didn't realize that the individual unconscious function that I deal with day in and day out in my normal
Hmm.
life, professional and personal, would have group application until I started looking into your stuff, and I have yet to read your book, admittedly, but I'm
Yeah,
very
yeah.
excited to. I'm going to slot it in at like number 237 on books I need to
There
read.
you go. Oh, that's pretty
But
good, man.
yeah,
Cracking the top
only
300 there.
236 ahead of you. Yeah, but
Well, wait, real quick. One of
yeah,
just as a, I'm going to forget it if I don't say it now, but you mentioned that like constant forming of subcommittees thing. And I would argue that that's a good example of, like, when I hear that, what I'm thinking of is, first of all, that's a great metaphor for like what we see in government and probably a lot of universities where it's just like death by administration.
yeah,
And
homeostasis.
yeah, yeah. So I would argue that uh, what the group is doing there is like just trying to tread water and ensure its survival, and that the
Correct.
basic, yeah, the basic like assumption, as Beyond would say, or the unconscious drive is just stringing things along to survive, right? And
Yes.
so I would call that like a continuation unconscious goal that's being enacted. And so there's somebody like you that's like, yo, we have this explicit task we're supposed to be working on as an organization. And the group's like, oh, we're just gonna like sit here in the canoe and kind of keep riding the current and don't like mess with our secret goal, basically our unconscious goal. And so they will be upset if you're pointing out the insanity of like committee after committee after committee. But I would argue Beyond, I'm sure, would find a way to like slot that into one of his main three. But that'd be like an example that you just said, where I think having a separate category for for that as like group just trying to maintain equilibrium and survive rather than reach the stated goal is like its own mode that it can get stuck in.
It's probably would fall into fight or flight because what you're inherently doing is
Mm.
threatening the existence of the group itself. And so we in family systems we talk about first order change and second order change. First order change is a change that is obvious and tangible and makes a difference. And we'll talk family systems, for example. So think of this family system. Just pick a family of five: dad, mom, three kids, right? And there's a dog and a cat. Okay, so dad has an alcohol abuse problem, we'll say. Um, the family functions around that in its own homeostasis, meaning it maintains its own systemic whatever
Yep.
it does,
Yep. Hmm.
based around dad's
Yep.
functional alcoholism, right? If we get dad to stop drinking, that's a first
Hmm.
order change. But it's not necessarily a change that affects the entire system and the way the system operates. So
Right.
unconsciously, to use your terminology and mine, I guess, the system will fight the change because the members of the system, without even knowing it, they play a certain role. And those
Hmm.
roles often are conflated with identities. So if they don't
Yep.
have the role
Yep.
to play anymore, their identity then itself is threatened. And
Yep.
who is one without an identity, right? So we'll fight to keep these identities, even though they may not be useful or helpful or whatnot. So
Hmm.
the second order change would be when dad stops being the quote unquote sick person and mom no longer has to caretake dad and the children are no longer living in fear and the dog's not cowering in the corner and the cat doesn't have to,
Hmm.
care for the dog or whatever. And they all individually change. You now as a therapist, I cannot produce a second order change. I can motivate a first order change, but without the first order change, the second order change doesn't happen anyway. And I think what we're describing here in the group setting is somebody like me comes in and kicks in the door and is like, "What are y'all doing? We're not making any progress." And that might be get a first order change, but the very invitation to that threatens everybody's role in the group. And if they've so closely tied themselves with the group identity that they
Hmm.
don't know, quote unquote, who they are without it, they will unconsciously, reflexively fight the accountability that I'm introducing, right?
Right.
And I've seen this with the forming of the subcommittees or the hey, who's going to hand out flyers? I'll go hand out the flyers, and then the flyers just never even make it into my hands. Some of my criticisms that have gotten me into trouble, I suppose you could say, are that very matter where I'm asking for tangible progress because in my mind we're supposed to achieve something and then cease to exist. But that's not the normal function of how most groups, whether it's a business or an organization or a nonprofit or a committee thereof or whatever it is, they, I think the implied or unconscious belief or function is that we'll be here forever because if we exist now, there will always be a need for us to exist in perpetuity. And I guess I just don't believe that. And to put a fine point on this and an example, I work a lot in suicide prevention. And one of the unpopular opinions I have is that suicide prevention, as we know it, low these past 20, 25, 30 years, just simply doesn't work. If it did, suicide rates would be going down. They're not, they're going up. So if we're going to get serious about suicide prevention, we have to get people to stay well and never actually slide into the place of despondency where they become suicidal.
Hmm.
Well, that inherently would threaten the existence of all suicide prevention organizations because if people were staying healthy and never getting suicidal, we'd all lose our
Yep.
jobs, which I think sounds really nice, and I would fight for that.
Well, can I
But I don't know that
that's like
everybody
a
shares that.
that's a good I want to bookmark that last point real quick. But before the other thing you said around, oh shoot, what was it? Oh, right, the group dynamic of a family, right, with a
Second order
alcoholic dad.
change, yeah,
Yeah, I think I would make a hot take on this and say that any therapist that does not understand that those seemingly dysfunctional roles also have an upside is you cannot be good at your job.
correct. I would agree.
Anyone that works with groups, you have to be able to understand this idea that the roles, whether that's the scapegoat, even the nasty ones, like the scapegoat that's getting viciously scapegoated, there's a deal being made effectively at an unconscious level. There's that dynamic and those roles are serving the system in some way.
Correct.
And
The system will
until
fight change.
yeah, the system will fight change and it will fight change because it's getting some benefit. Until you have a nuanced understanding of like in a hypothesis, you don't have to always be 100% right, but you have to be curious and understand that like what is the system getting out of it? And if you have not like learned to ask that question in groups, I'm not talking to you, Jake, obviously, but the general you, like as a newer therapist or a group facilitator or a coach, if you haven't learned to ask that question around, okay, this seems really dysfunctional. This seems like it's even the client might identify that as this thing as the problem. They might be willing to talk about it, but that's a weird little taboo question for a lot of people. It's like, well,
It,
okay,
yep,
what
it
is the
is.
group gaining from this?
Well, it's
Like
it's
we talk
unpopular.
about.
It's unpopular because it hurts people's feelings to imply that they're responsible for part of the pathology, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like
it ruins the victim narrative.
yeah. Oh, well, you're victim blaming. It's like, no, I'm just asking what role you
Right.
play. Yeah, we all
Right.
play
Yeah,
a
and
role.
yeah, so it's hard to, which is it's a good thing that it takes people out of the victim narrative, right? It's taking a step. So, if I'm getting scapegoated and I'm able to say, okay, like hold on, slow down. What am I getting from this? Well, yeah, I mean, I'm getting a lot of negative attention, but I'm getting a lot of attention from the group.
Correct.
We talk about in the book, I argue that there are two types of scapegoats. There's a type of scapegoat that is where the language traditionally comes from for scapegoating, which is a member where it's loaded up with all these projections and then expelled from the group as a way to like absolve the members from sin or whatever.
It's a sacrifice. Yeah.
That's yeah. That's where that lingo comes from, right? Um, Interestingly, and I'm going to screw up the actual Latin root, but Adon um, found this work by this guy named Steve Creamy, who talks about the root of the word scapegoat is something like it's some Latin root that is extremely close and related to the root word for medicine. And so
I
there's,
think Natalie Martinick talked about this recently. I'm
okay.
gonna miss it, but I think she talked. Do you know Natalie?
Mm-mm.
She's got a great Substack. She was on Noggin Notes recently. She
Okay, I'll
talks a
check.
lot about narcissistic abuse and stuff, but she's got a recent thing. What do you call it? Installment series talking about scapegoating.
Mm-hmm.
And she's got
Oh,
this cute
cool.
little AI generated cartoon of a goat that's like the scapegoat, and he's always hanging his head.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah. Well, and so what we argue, because we have one chapter that looks at that, and we talk about, I think there are two types. I think type of scapegoat that we see very, very commonly is one that the group keeps around. It's like a perpetual receptacle of projections for the group. And the group will be very defensive and strangely defensive of this object of abuse, effectively, that they're
yeah,
able
like they
to.
won't terminate it because they need it
No,
to
yeah,
absorb their sins or whatever. Yeah.
right, right. So I think of those as like two distinct categories. There's the scapegoat that the group is like one-time use and like expelling, and you can see that dynamic in certain groups where they're like expelling members slowly over time. But I also
Been that
think,
guy.
yeah, yeah. I mean, dude, yeah. I've been in organizations where that's the case, and that's a big long conversation. But I do think that there's this other group where they keep the scapegoat around. Um, what was I going to say? Oh yeah, the that last point you made. What was it? We were talking about oh right, the if I how did you frame? Oh, the suicide hotline, right? Like, so if folks work in the world of suicide prevention, they're perversely incentivized as an industry to keep that as a relevant
Homelessness is the
problem.
same
Yeah.
thing.
Well, homelessness
Harm
is the same.
reduction,
Yeah,
the whole
Thomas,
harm reduction thing.
sure.
Yep.
And Thomas Sowell and oh, I'm forgetting there's a very prominent 19th century black thinker that I'm forgetting who said this as well, where it's like effectively, racism is never going to go away as long as it's an industry.
Oh yeah. I
He's
don't know who
said
can
it said
credit
it
with that, but
way more eloquently, but that's when we can segue into like political issues of the day. It's like how much does Ibram Kendi and Robin DiAngelo, how much do they want to put themselves out of business?
yeah.
Um, and that's like one kind of critical lens, right? Like you can obviously take the concept of that argument and say like, no, actually, this is still seriously like a problem. But there is something to that idea of the unconscious. If a group is incentivized around something, it's going to affect behavior. That's not a crazy take. That's just
It's
basic,
fact. Yeah, it's fact.
right? hmm and so we see that with a lot of the political stuff, like if we have a system that incentivizes shock value and rage bait clicks, that's going to influence the type of news that you're shown.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So what do we do? I could hypothesize that if I were hired, if I were you, for example, what I would do in groups, because I do this and I can speak to it, I would point out the the warts. I would make the unconscious conscious. I would do it, politely and diplomatically and
Mhm.
compassionately. But that would be my goal. And I would tell everybody right from the jump, maybe they have to sign a consent form or something. Because sometimes I find myself doing this in the office as well, where I go, "Hey, I'm about to tell you something that's really going to shock your system, but you hired me." And they go, "Ha ha ha, can't wait to see what's coming." And then I tell them, and then they're like, "Yeah, you're right. I need to make some change in this area." Is this what you do, or like, how do you go about doing this when you're in a position to work with these
Mhm.
organizations, or how have you done it in the past?
Yeah, I think that honest labeling is huge, right? We talk about that myth of there's a Shinto myth where the sun goddess is like put in the cave by the storm, the god of the storm. There's a lot of good symbolism in there around like Jungian ideas around like water and the unconscious and all this stuff. But the basic idea is that the myth gives us a little bit of a prescription. It's curiosity on the part of the sun goddess that eventually lures her out. And so becoming curious about these dynamics, I think taking a stance where you're not, this gets into like sidestepping projections of dependence and being like the strong man, which is a real risk as the therapist or facilitator. The group will often want you to have
Yeah,
the
they'll
answers,
project
but
that on you, right? Yeah.
yeah, so remaining curious, fearless, and naming the things that you see, I think, is a good kind of starting point. Um, one of the, we're getting into like this. This is basically the answer to the question is, well, you got to start doing good therapy or good facilitation, which is like a whole field of expertise. There's no quick answer for any of this, but I think a good like cue for me, if I'm in that position, if I'm feeling like a big emotional charge around something, that often indicates that it may not be like the starting point for curiosity. If I'm feeling when I'm in
Mm-hmm.
groups, that emotional charge, you learn uh, to see that as a sign that you're being recruited into a role. Like that emotional Velcro often pulls us into roles. Um, you said even with that framing of like, hey, I'm about to tell you something that's hard, right? Like certainly sometimes that helps the medicine get taken up, right? And I've noticed that at times when I start with a preface to an insight, a lot of times it's me getting pulled into some sort of role. Like I want to ameliorate, I want to baby, I want to
Oh,
so
that's a good observation. Yeah, 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 yeah. Could be your issue, not theirs. Yeah.
right. Like it's around managing. On one level, it's about like suddenly before you can introduce the insight, you're having to manage anxiety, but really it's like often going to be my anxiety that I'm
Correct.
managing
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
to avoid like these gnarly projections. I said this on one of Ryan's podcasts recently. Like recently wrote an open letter to these organizations that run group relations conferences, and they run these big experiential conferences where you go and it's not like PowerPoints. You're not like studying actual material. The task is to look at the dynamics as they arise in the here and now, which is a very slippery,
That's
weird
cool.
task.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
cool, but I
crazy.
could see how it'd go off the rails real quick too.
Goes off the rails. People regress pretty aggressive.
Yeah.
Like they get triggered hard by this environment, which is just task being, hey, like what's happening in the room. People want to talk about outside politics. People want to like tell stories about themselves to kind of frame themselves and be seen
Yeah.
a certain way. And the consultants that run them, if they're doing their job well, they're pointing out these things as they go along.
Yeah.
They're pointing them out with some poetic touches and all
But
this stuff. But
Bowen would call that triangles, but yeah.
okay, nice, yeah, yeah. And then what I what I've seen and what I think is very poor behavior, I would say a lack of skill on the part of some of the administrations that run some of these, some of the directorates that run some of these conferences is if they're framing the conference beforehand with a very specific politically charged theme, um, A, that's antithetical to the study of these groups because it's presumptuous to know to imagine that we know what is going to emerge from the group unconscious. You cannot be fully curious and in the moment and also impose your preconceived agenda
Yeah, it's
on a
like a
specific
trigger
group.
warning. It's like giving them a
Right.
trigger warning, right?
Well, and that's the other thing. I didn't put this in the letter, but I wish I would have. I think that there's a real sidestepping of the responsibility by framing things in social justice language before these conferences, because what you're doing is you're trying to manage the projections towards
Yeah.
you
Yeah. Yep.
as authority, so you're trying to influence and effectively like truncate the range of projections that can come your way. I think for some of these people it's really uncomfortable. They do not want to be seen as authoritarian. They equate these
Or,
things like
or
with
or
the
they don't want to be seen as what they don't like, right? Like they're
yeah,
trying to cushion the outputs based on their own fears of what will be put out. That's
yeah, they
essentially
do.
what it is, right?
Right, yeah, yeah. There's like an anxiety about being seen as like a fascist potentially in this climate. Like, oh no, like they're getting way out ahead of it and throwing out the social justice languages that say like, hey, some of these titles, one of them was like, oh, struggle. I remember it was struggling to stand, uh, like leadership as democracy dies or something like that. And it's like,
Oh
okay,
dear.
well, clearly you're putting yourself in a very specific place on the political spectrum and like um yeah, I think it's a real abdication of like there's something very valuable and beautiful of being like a fairly blank slate for projections to come your way. So you hold the boundaries, you give your observations, and you allow that space. In the context, it's therapy is going to be a little bit different because you have specific goals for like growth and the well-being, which is different than an environment where we are here to study the group, right? Like two
Yeah,
different
yeah,
goals,
yeah,
but
yeah. I agree. I agree. Yeah, because there's no the preconceived notion of a group that studies the group itself is that you don't know what the outcome is going to be.
yeah, you
But
have to
for
be humble
somebody who's
about it.
trying to
Yeah.
control that, you're inherently you're inherently injecting your own unconscious, probably some would say it's conscious desires about what you want the output to be. I fear
Yeah,
this in the
yeah.
research community actually too, because that's
Oh,
one of
for
the things
sure. Yeah.
they caution us against in research is like, you know, be aware of your biases, but you can't be aware of all your biases. So
Right, right.
just ask the question and see where the data take you. And it's like,
I
well,
mean,
what if I frame
I
the questions differently? I can get different data.
right for sure. I think that the just simplest and most brutally blunt way to put it is that when people name their conference some politically charged thing, they're just attempting to hamper the process of learning
Oh
about
yeah,
groups.
yeah.
There's still going to be the things that come up. They can't stop it, but they have put themselves out of integrity with what the consulting role is supposed to be. And so I wrote this, fairly blunt letter that a few people responded to, but really just like wanted to get it out there. I The other thing I would say is that I'm not a therapist, but I do think it's important for therapists to be very comfortable and familiar with that skill set of allowing those projections to hit them too, because then that's like great material to work with. It's you need to have your finger on the pulse and not just have one mode of being as a therapist, of course, and like adjust to the situation. But I do think it's like you mentioned that the newer education models and people coming out of grad school in the last 10 years, like I think one of the losses there is that you have a preponderance of young therapists that the idea of sitting in a negative projection from their client, and when I say negative, I mean
Uncomfortable.
yeah, one that is eliciting difficult emotions,
Yeah.
right? So if you're the idea of sitting there and holding like the bad mother for a client and like sitting in it and allowing it to be a space where that gets fully explored is it's an alien concept to a lot of young therapists. It's not something they're comfortable with at all. They don't know how to navigate it.
Well, they don't
They
even see
just
it. They don't
they don't
even
even
know.
see it. Yeah, well, it'd be terrifying for them. They default to just like this bastardization of like Carl Rogers type of techniques to just like basically stay friends with the client. And if you're not willing to like hold that space or you're just not going to get as much information and you're not going to be able to work with some of these really crippling type of projections that if you're
Yeah.
if you're working
Yeah.
to stay friendly, you're getting a very small range of like that client's psyche
But
effectively.
yeah, and unfortunately, that's what's happened is that we've prioritized being nice over being effective, and to me, it
Hmm.
comes down to distress tolerance in general.
Yep.
I teach a lot of emotional functioning. Everybody knows this. I have a whole video series on it, and the whole point is, I mean, this there's many points, but one of the points is that if you can tolerate your own emotions well, you can tolerate other people and their emotions. So when they're having very horrible experiences, if I, as the treating provider, or I as just a friend or a family member, or a coworker or colleague, if I know myself well enough to know
Mm.
what they're going through and I can sit in it, I can endure it without having to bail them out of it. And I think what you described there, I alluded to Murray Bowen earlier in the triangles. So in in Bowen's eight concepts of Bowenian theory, one of the things he discusses is this idea of triangles. You and I can have an intense conversation about you and me as soon as we reach for something external, and really right now we're not having a conversation between you and me, we're talking about concepts. Those concepts are
Hmm.
outside of us. It creates a triangle. There's 3 points there, the
Right.
concepts, me, and then you. So
Hmm.
when people reach for the external, it's inherently pulling them away from the intimacy between two people.
Mm.
Intimacy is distressing because it risks exposure, and with exposure comes potential for pain and all sorts of
Oh,
things.
that's good.
Now, if I
Yeah,
know
yeah.
that I can tolerate pain, I don't mind the exposure. I don't mind the projection. I can carry that. If somebody wants me to be their dad for a moment in session, even if she's 62 years old, I can hold that and then bookmark it and then later say, hey, about this thing that you said, I wonder if, right? And then we go explore and it becomes grist for the therapeutic mill, as Yalom would say. But if I
Mm.
can't, I may become defensive. I may
Yep.
shirk that responsibility. I may triangulate myself and say, oh, let's move off of that and on to something else. When what is being offered to me is this very precious opportunity to explore something very deep with
Yes.
somebody who
Yes.
needs it. So,
Yep.
yeah, that's a really critical point. I'm glad you made it, and it is sad to me to see the grad schools failing to teach not only
Hmm.
the concept, but to educate the students on how to hold that space
Yep.
well and properly.
That's so I've read a little Bowen and it's been a long time, but the that idea of the triangles you talked about is I'm going to steal that because it's beautiful. Like with the group relations type of work, that's exactly what you named it. I was describing it. It's where like we're in a group and people aren't able to be in that intimacy. What they end up doing is it's like me and you, and now the story of myself I'm going to tell you, or
Yes,
the
yes.
political stuff out here that I'm going to relate to. I have to bring in some tool, some other things to mask, right? Like something to
Right.
put in front of me that I can, like yeah, it's that's a beautiful concept for
There's,
sure.
by the way, there's a great exercise. You could steal this too. I got it from Christian Conti, who's my friend and mentor. And if you're playing the Christian Conti drinking game, take a drink. Every time his name is mentioned, we take a drink. But he did this exercise with us in grad school where he pulled 6 or 8 people outside. They were in pairs, and the rest of the class was there. And the people in the hallway didn't know what was happening, but the folks in the class were to somebody had a stopwatch, and our job was to time and see how long it took before the pair pulled in something that had nothing to do with them, right? So
Mm.
all the people in the hallway said was go in and talk to each other. So we came in and go, oh, hi, Brent. How you doing? Good, Jake. How are you? Well, some weather today. Click. The
Yeah. Boom.
stopwatch clicks because the weather is not about you
Yep.
and me. Now, if
No.
you and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
a
Hmm.
great conversation, the clock keeps running, but inherently it was like, or I'm sorry, not inherently, inevitably it was like, under a minute that we
Yeah.
couldn't hold that intimacy between us, talking about real things. Now, granted, there's a classroom there, so it's a little artificial, but the point still stands that
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
we have a tough time tolerating intimacy
Hmm.
between individuals without reaching for something else, some third party, some gossip, something like that.
Well, and I think yes, that's awesome. That's a good, cool experiment. I does 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 Bowen consider like the stories, the narratives that we tell about ourselves as like a outside object? That's one of the
Honestly, I
that's
can't
one of the like
remember. I can't
it's one
remember,
of the
but
primary ways that groups avoid without almost without fail in these. And I've done a lot of group relations conferences in the small groups, especially like because they'll have you be in the large group and then you break out into smaller groups, which is like 8 people and one consultant. There's 8 people sitting there not knowing what to talk about, and it's so common that someone's like, "Well, I guess I'll introduce myself. I am," and then basically, everyone's multifaceted. Humans are very deep creatures, but there's like a story that's nice sounding that I want to tell about myself to you so that you'll see me in a certain way.
Right.
Right. And so people launch into what to me very much feels like a triangulated object. It's a narrative about me. It's like, well, I guess I've studied psychology at blah, blah, blah. I'm really into blah, social justice, X, Y, Z. Like, however people want to like portray themselves, it's always what it effectively is like, let me bring in this story about how I'm a good person and pretty smart and pretty interesting. That's what people bring in. And it feels
And
like an
they
external object to me.
yes, and it's crafted and sculpted in a way that you get the audience to see what you want them to see
Right.
rather than honesty, right? And I'm not saying
Yeah.
it's dishonest necessarily to give your verbal resume, which footnote to that, it's I don't give verbal resumes. When I give a presentation, I say, "Hi, I'm Jake Wiskerson, marriage and family therapist by trade, licensed in Nevada," because people want to know, at least a little something. I say, um, beyond that, I don't think a verbal resume is very interesting. I think we'll waste your time if I say anything. And besides, I think the information I'm about to present should stand on its own, irrespective of any credentialing I have. And people, you should see the audience. They're like, "Oh, that's different. Like, this guy doesn't care about himself." No, I don't. I don't really care about myself.
Yeah.
I care about
Yeah.
what I'm about to say. And that seems to have a lot greater effect because it takes me out of it. It's not about me. I'm no longer the vessel. I'm no longer the important thing. I'm just a vessel communicating the important thing, right? And I think that most
Right.
people's, and this gets into ego stuff, most people's ego gets in the way of their true self. And from the ego, we get defense mechanisms trying to keep the ego in place. And I got to believe that organizations have egos also, and groups have egos. And I think groups can have disorders too. I think certainly organizations and entities can have disorders. So you can have a totally disordered system. And it's like, well, the people in it are lovely people. I'm thinking state government, for example. Most people in state government are lovely people. They work very hard. They're always friendly on the phone. They try to solve my problem, but the system itself is just chaotically disturbed. It's like, how do we fix that? Collective action problem, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot to say about that in the realm of um, group as a whole thinking, like the type of stuff that we do and write about. Like we
Please, yeah.
basically, yeah, yeah. Well, I'd say, I mean, that's effectively what the book is about. Like it's about like bringing in mythic archetypes to look at how uh, it's like that lens, that synthesis between archetypes. So like we in the book don't talk about it as like a disordered group, but what we might say is that like this group is
Pulling up the book now. God's Heroes and Groups, by the way. I want to give that
yeah,
another plug.
yeah, like so this group is like enamored with Ares, right? Or like actualizing like the principles of the god of war or something like that. Like that'd be like a combative group. We talk about, yeah, basically looking at the function of leadership and how that shows up in that context. So some of the time I think there's a few different, it's not a simple concept, right? Leadership. I think sometimes leadership acts as like conduit to archetypes. And so if you have a group that's in like fight response and that's their identity, that's where they keep coming back to, then you'll see if that group wants a leader that's like a conduit to an archetype, you'll see um like a maybe more of like a military like general type of like rise to the top in
Yeah,
that
okay,
situation,
okay. Hmm.
bringing that like Aries energy. um and also sometimes you see groups use leadership differently. And I say it this way intentionally, like the group unconscious uses leaders. There's the old Freudian idea that's kind of stuck with us and it feels natural to many, right? Is that like leaders are in power. And what we talk about is like really the group unconscious is in power and it tolerates leadership that it does not, it tolerates leadership that is
That's
um
aligned with it.
that's aligned with the things that it wants generally. And so really that rare variety of very, very skilled leader will be intuitively at least aware of like the unconscious dynamics in the group. They'll feel that and they'll be able to kind of surf around that and not, you don't want to be that type of leader that's just like putting your hands up against the like tidal wave of the unconscious and like basically being a Karen
I've been that
around
guy
like,
too, as it turns out, and I wasn't
yeah,
super welcomed, nor was it effective.
right. Well, it's a rigid idealist stance. And you have to understand that I think like skilled, leaders probably don't have this vocabulary generally, but they would understand that there are those dynamics in the group that you have to navigate. We talk about like, how does Odysseus get out of the Cyclops cave? Well, they ride on the underbelly of the sheep. And so we talk, there's these critical junctures as a leader where you have to decide like you have to effectively like ride the masses and ride the sheep, like the sheep being a good metaphor for that unconscious, like just sheep like mentality and that herd mentality. There are moments where like a good leader is like, it's not time to
Stab the
be loud and
Cyclops.
vocal. Yeah, you're going to get smashed by the Cyclops, which is, I think, a good metaphor for the unconscious, like the monster within. It's time to like get out of the cave by riding the belly of the sheep. And then, you know, many leaders then just like keep hanging out with the sheep forever. And like you have to be flexible to say, okay, we're out of the cave. Time to like get on the
Right.
boat and move on. You don't like
Totally.
stay hanging out with the sheep. But there's all these little rich metaphors like that that I think are just good like one hits that hopefully leaders and folks can remember. That's I think that's the power of myth is it creates a like if you can anchor your thinking or concept to a story, it's just so much more easy to integrate.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And well, and for all the stuff we've been talking about, and it resonates because we all collectively, intuitively understand it. So it's like,
Mhm.
yeah, I get what you're talking about. Yeah, yeah, ride the belly of the sheep. Yep. Okay, on to the next thing. Like, okay, I don't have
Mhm.
to explain it any further because you just got it. I want to shift gears a little bit because I do want to talk about wilderness therapy. This is not something I think a lot of people are aware of. I am aware of it. I've never done it. I know some people who have said, I'm going to go off and be a wilderness therapist. Then I never talked to them again, so I assume they're just living in the wilderness. But it sounds really fascinating to me because as a guy who loves the outdoors and wants to go probably just bury his head in the sand and not talk to people anymore, it sounds lovely. But what is wilderness therapist? What was the or therapy? What happened with the I guess you could say some controversy around it, and what are the regulatory
Mhm.
structures in place? What do we expect out of what you describe as wilderness therapy? You did it for 4 years. I mean, it's a pretty considerable amount of
Yeah.
time to spend.
Yeah. Well, it's changed a ton, right? So I was not there at the conception. I came on the scene in like 2011. There were programs that were doing these like long excursions. We're talking like 2 to 3 months typically is like a stay um, for a teen or for a young adult that's coming into one
Living
of those
outdoors,
programs.
like is it
Mhm.
camping or is it like facilities or what is it?
Yeah, so it's changed. I'll talk about that.
Okay,
But traditionally, it would be like you carry what you need on your back. You get restock a couple times a week where they bring out different foods. But you're talking about camp foods, things that you can hike with, and you sleeping under a tarp, right? Like it's rugged. You don't have any of the distractions. You don't have any of the. I mean, that's the idea is that you're away from all of these things. It's this big reset. I often used to chuckle at the idea of like pitching the idea. It's basically like, let's take a bunch of dysfunctional teenage boys that have problems with drugs or aggression or we don't know what's going on with them and they're just withdrawn. But we'll take like all of those pretty much and we're going to put together a group of 10 of them and we're going to take away all the things they like that they want and give them only the things that they need and put them out in the woods and that's the program, and somehow it works, or it in many cases it works, I should say. Before I get too far into this, it's worth addressing. There's like been a ton of public backlash in the more recent years. I think Paris Hilton was one of the ones that really led that charge. She would I've not looked into it super deeply, but she I believe had like a what you would consider a really bad experience with wilderness therapy and believes that the industry is primarily abusive. Um, I've seen a lot of really great work happen. I do think I don't think, there have been some bad actors in the field and some bad things that have happened. Even a company that does have a good framework, like if a staff gets through that vetting process and is um, like a predator, for example, and finds ways to hurt a client, like that's a horrible, horrible outcome in a space that you're supposed to be going for therapy. There's also criticism around how many of the students come into the programs, which is if you're is effectively forced, right? Like it's if you're a 17-year-old and your parents are afraid going to get violent, you really, really need help, but you're not going to accept it and you're going to get violent. Like they'll pay companies to send guys over to like help them pack up and get going. And I think in more extreme versions, like there have been examples of people, having like kids in cuffs effectively, like while they transport them across the country. And so that's obviously really bad optics. And I understand where the parents are coming from. The industry has moved much more towards like having clients co-sign rather than just being forced, because that is a type of trauma, being kidnapped
Yeah.
effectively, right?
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
no you
So I've
can
heard.
look yeah, you can look at both sides of it, but it really is effectively like kidnapping kids to get them to care. And they call it
Well, I mean,
gooning.
footnote on that. When I worked inpatient, there were well more than one occurrence where kids got lied to, packed in the car,
Yep.
told they were going to
Yep. Yep.
Disneyland, dropped in the
Yep.
lobby, and the mental health techs wrestled them into. I mean, we're talking 10-year-olds. Like it was
Yeah. Yeah.
gross, man. And that's like
Hmm.
allegedly a well-vetted facility. At the time it was running under the UHC umbrella. It's like,
Yeah.
really? Do we really want to be part
So
of this?
the way, and I'm not in that field right now. I've recently, been when I was doing consulting work, I was visiting a lot of these programs still, and I still have a lot of friends that are, I should guess I have a couple of friends still that are involved in wilderness therapy companies. Some of the changes that they've made in response to these, which are I think smart and good, are really um, coaching the parents on how to present this, coaching the parents on how to show up when the transporters arrive. And making that process less traumatic effectively, coaching them away from some crazy lie that's going to just be a wound right at the beginning of treatment. That's not a good thing. Um, a lot of these programs are much, much more like the safety is higher. Uh, one of the one of the criticisms is that, if you take high risk kids out into the woods in Utah deserts, or even in like the North Carolina winters, which get surprisingly cold, like they're over a course of however many years, you're going to have like some kids are going to die. And it's going to be because, it's usually going to be because they run away um, and get lost. Like one program closed down in North Carolina. It had two deaths in its history. One of them was a kid who ran away, fell like off out of a tree, broke his hip, and it was so cold he went hypothermic before they could find him.
Jeez.
Awful, awful stuff. And that demographic of kids that is high risk, that is very extensive drug use and risky tendencies, is going to have a higher than normal fatality rate out in the real world too, right? Like especially in the days of fentanyl and all this stuff, it's awful. But yeah, they've become much more safer and also risk averse. Those programs have over time, so it's like a lot less backcountry hikes that where the back in the day, man, it was like you were really encouraged to get off the road. And it was talked about, it changes the psychology of the kids when you don't like see a road really. You're just like out in the woods. But now there's much more testing. Some of the, it's like a mixed bag. Like it's good that there's like more testing, but you have testers come out, and so the kids have to be road accessible. You have um, more turnover in staff, and so you have staff that haven't been there doing it for 3 to 4 years. You have a 2 year tenured staff. Like they're probably able to keep the groove safe, but they're not going to be as confident with like going on a gnarly managing the group dynamics of a dysfunctional group of teens while they do like a 5 mile backcountry out just into the middle of nowhere. That becomes pretty daunting. I think in general they become uh, safer and less potent, is what I would say.
Still
So
effective though?
I, I, I'm
Maybe.
not as involved. So
Okay.
I think there are probably some folks doing great work still. A lot of these companies have closed. I would
Uh,
say if you're looking at the trends, it's a declining industry at this point. It's been vilified really hard, and most programs have closed down. Not all. There are still some, but they've moved more towards like these hybrid base camp models, which it's not the same level of challenge. If you're the kids that would come through in 2012 would be really, they're not like inside for 3 months. They're figuring out how to provide for their needs. They learn how to bow drill a fire. They learn how to hike. They're usually, they're getting in better shape. They're eating healthier, even though it's camp food. There's like a lot of intention put into the diet. They're not eating like Taco Bell at midnight while they're on their 18th hour of gaming, getting high with friends or whatever. Um, and I think I've worked for both models, and some of the hybrid programs that emphasize the base camp model, like you get staff that get conditioned to be less resilient too, because they know that they can just get pulled and pulled to the cabins ahead. When I was a staff, and that's the thing. When I was back in my day, it was like
Yeah.
we would have these crazy freezing conditions, and you learn how to keep the kids warm. You learn when to check on them. The sleeping bags themselves do a great job of like synthetic material that are super low rated. You learn how to set up tarps so that snow doesn't uh, pack on and like
Smother
basically
you.
cave them in. Yeah, you learn how to really effectively like monitor capillary refill on kids' feet to make sure that they're not that they're hydrating enough and also not getting cold injuries. You have like you get hardcore with all of these skills and you're doing it all the time. If you know you can just call and get pulled, it's the incentive to be very, very skilled at that safety element is much less. Like I remember it blew my mind. I had a group of staff that were when I was a director, just whining to me to get pulled when it was in the 40s and raining. And I was like, yeah, I mean, it's not going to be like a fun day, but that's the point. Like you're out
Yeah,
there
yeah,
doing
yeah.
hard things and learning that you're capable of doing hard things. And so even when I have that kind of experience and I understand that, okay, the staff team is not capable of modeling resilience here. They're using the unsafe code word. Oh, I feel unsafe, and
Yeah.
that's hard to argue with. And also, it's a dead giveaway that you're not dealing with uh, resilient, hardcore staff. It's like something's changed in the staff culture. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with how they structure the programs now.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and culture and society writ large, probably not being real, again, distress tolerance, right? What have we become? We've become fat, dumb, and happy off of instant gratification, everything. So I get it. I get it.
yeah.
I
So
guess
you're,
at bare minimum, you're still stripping away social media access and,
yeah,
civilization.
yeah.
That's not a bad thing.
I do think it's probably less effective, but safer. So you're not going to have the likelihood of your kid um, getting having an adverse experience with a staff that's not safe or getting their hands on like some illicit substance or whatever it is, like stuff that or even running away and like hurting themselves. Like all of those risk factors have been managed down while the capacity and the trade-off there is more administration, more turnover in staff because the meeting is less. You're losing like those like big aha moments as much because the challenge, right? Like if you're not climbing to the top of the mountain, you ain't getting the view.
Right.
And so, um, give and take,
Yeah.
and it's expensive as hell. That's the other thing. These programs are like $700 to $800 a day, and usually private pay.
Yeah. Yeah. It would be nice to return to something that's paid for by insurance. I'm sure there's private foundations that probably would support
There
something
are.
like that. But
Hmm.
if we could if we could swing the pendulum back a little bit to say, hey, this is good and awesome and wholesome and worthwhile, maybe we get some investors to resurrect the field. Because to my mind, that sounds glorious. I mean, it sounds amazing. Like my knees
Yeah,
and my back would not like it, but I would absolutely do something like that for a week, right?
dude,
And
it was a huge light bulb for me. It blew my mind. I was I in my head, I see myself as having been a really naive, dumb kid that didn't understand even how to show up basically in any relationship. I don't mean even just romantic, but like how to relate, how to be intimate, how to like introspect, how to look at my anxieties and how those were affecting my behaviors, all that stuff. Maybe I'd read it in a book, but it was like suddenly very real. So it was. I'm very grateful for my time as a wilderness guide.
That's awesome. Uh, I guess well, we're up on an hour now. We've covered a lot, and I appreciate your time. Let's wrap this up a little bit. What do you want the audience to take away? What's one or two things that you really want to impart as we close down here with regard to group dynamics, where they may be in their own groups or organizations or companies, and what do you want people to know most of all as we depart here?
Well, I think maybe just the idea that there is a whole field of deep thought around how groups work, right? That most therapists are unaware of because it's housed under this world of like organizational psychology. Just as like most organizational psychology practitioners are probably not super aware of Bowen's stuff or even some of the more popular frameworks like um, Tuckman's phases of groups or whatever. There's not a lot of talking between those two groups, and so for therapists out there listening, like there are some pretty cool resources on just how groups operate and the unconscious dynamics in groups, and you can broaden your perspective and probably increase your efficiency and the things you have in your tool belt by picking up a copy. One is like there's The Unconscious at Work is a book that's out there. There's our book for sure, God's Heroes and Groups, and it's a big rabbit hole. There's a lot of room to develop skill in how you see, perceive, mold, work with, and choose your interventions in relation to the group unconscious. So that'd be my big thing is like get curious about that. It's like it's a whole big world, and there's a lot of pretty interesting perspectives that don't have to become your primary lens that you bring to a session, but you're going to increase your ability to think critically and ask good questions if you're knowledgeable in that area.
I certainly appreciate it because when I first heard about the group thing, I was thinking, because this is all we get in schools, group therapy, right? A bunch of
Right.
individuals there to work on themselves, but organizations and groups is a different beast altogether because they have different goals. So I agree with you. I think that it would be wise for most individual psychotherapists to pick into this a little bit and understand the systemic nature of what their individual patients may be experiencing in the workplace, in their home, in their recreational settings, right? Because those are all groups too. I like that idea. That's really cool. And I think too, we probably, if I had to guess, if somebody said like you do what you do, and I think most of us would reflexively write it off as quote unquote coaching, and coaching is therefore bad because coaching is unlicensed, unregulated, and the only way to
Then,
prove competence is through a licensing board, right? So I think a lot of us just get indoctrinated with this belief that anybody who's not a licensee is somehow worthless or something, right?
yeah.
Causing harm, which is total hogwash. And I want to be very clear about that. I think that there's a lot of ways to heal people, and many of them are good, and ours is just one of them. And I really reject the idea that it's, the only way to ascertain competence is through the state regulatory body. I appreciate your time. Do you, by the way, nobody's going to see this on YouTube until we upload it, which is probably going to be 6 years from now. But do you get any celebrity comparisons?
I think there's this one actor. Do you know who Jai Courtney is? That's like a
I
actor who
don't
was in
think so.
Spartacus. He has like curly blonde hair. I get that one sometimes. Or I
But
used to. He's not a super A-lister anymore, but what do you got?
do you know Freddie Freeman?
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, I've heard that one before, actually from a client in wilderness therapy. That's the
That's
only other
funny.
time. That's
You
funny,
you
yeah.
do have a striking resemblance to Freddie Freeman. So yeah,
There
who is a good-looking man, by the way, and I'm
we
not
go. Yeah.
ashamed to say it. I'm
We'll
not a
take it.
Dodger
We'll
fan,
take
but
it.
tell
He
everybody
well, he
where they
was
can. Oh,
I grew up in Atlanta, so he was
oh,
a
there you go. Yeah,
Braves. Yeah.
perfect. Yeah, you're in Arizona now, yeah, right? Is that
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Okay. Tell everybody where they can find you, please.
Yeah, I mean my Twitter is at the group lens, like THEGR. Oh, I don't need to spell it out. The group lens. And it's probably the best place. I'm pretty charged on like the application of group thinking towards the world of politics currently. After the assassination of Charlie Kirk, that really kind of lit a fire under me to post a little bit more. Folks will find that I'm what I would argue I'm like centrist by any sane definition, but in this current climate, that makes me a conservative, I
You're all
suppose.
right.
And so,
You're all right, and so am I.
yeah, right.
Yeah,
So
because we're
yeah, you
not
can
left.
expect to see that type of posting if you do follow me currently. But yeah, I'm pretty active on Twitter. Other than that, I think, the book's a good resource. It's available. You can buy it on Barnes and Noble or through Karnak in the UK. Once again, shout out to my co-author, Adon Moran, who is starting his grad school work at Oxford currently and about to get married
Nice.
next month.
Nice.
But yeah,
Yeah.
he's on as Adon P. Moran, and he's on X as well.
Gods, Heroes, and Groups, Relational Dynamics through Mythic Archetypes, Brant Elwood and Adon Moran. Uh, you don't have a website if people want to hire you or reach out or
We
whatever?
do. We need to update it. I'd
Okay.
say
Just
get in touch
X.
with me on X. Yeah.
Okay. The group lens. Well, thanks, man. Been a pleasure talking to you and look forward to interacting more on the interwebs.
Yeah, man.
On behalf of our Noggin Notes team and our Zephyr Wellness family, we wish you all great mental wellness. Bye bye.